Hi, I'm Tony. I'm doing a video here on homelessness. And can you tell me a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So I'm Matthew Doherty. I'm the Executive Director of the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness. We're a federal agency that coordinates all of our 19 member agencies in the strategic efforts to end homelessness across the country. So we work very closely with HUD, with Health and Human Services, with the VA, with the Department of Labor, with education, all of the agencies to make sure all of the federal programs are having the most impact they can and are investing in the strongest and the best practices.
Big responsibility.
Yep.
Let's see. So we're here in San Diego. How does the plan affect us? What's going on the national level?
And I actually used to live in San Diego, so I lived here for 14 years doing housing and homelessness related work for most of that time, and then just recently moved to DC in June of 2015. So definitely have a good perspective on what's happening here and then also what's happening in communities across the country. And I think the things that are really starting to be a stronger focus here in San Diego are the practices that are driving the progress we see in other places. So the focus on housing first and making sure we're getting people into housing as quickly as possible within the right level of services, and really focusing on those housing outcomes as the fundamental reason that programs and agencies exist and are working with people experiencing homelessness. That seems to have become a much greater focus here in San Diego as well. And then making sure that we're connecting the programs that are about homelessness with the full range of other programs and services in the community. And that also feels like it's really coming together here in San Diego, with the county and the city and the continuum of care starting to work together and plan together in much more purposeful ways. Yep. And I think seeing the ability to set really bold goals and drive to those and use those goals to drive as much urgency and action as we can, that has really made a difference at the national level. I think that's an area where San Diego could be a little bit bolder, I think, and be really purposeful about what it is we're trying to accomplish here, and set ambitious goals that drive the level of urgency that really is necessary to respond to the crisis people are experiencing every night.
What are some places that are doing well solving the homeless problem?
So we're seeing a lot of communities who are making progress. I think where we've seen the most progress and the biggest accomplishments is around veterans homelessness. We've had the bipartisan support for federal programs to scale up the HUD-VASH program, the HUD-VA supportive housing program, and the supportive services for veteran families program. And communities have really been able to mobilize those resources. And one of our roles is we coordinate the confirmation of whether communities have achieved the goal of ending veteran homelessness. And so we look very closely at their data and their strategies and how they've worked across all of their partners locally. And to date, we've been able to confirm that about 35 communities have achieved the goal and have built a system that is quickly housing veterans and focused on those housing outcomes I talked about, and making sure that their people are stable and successful after they exit homelessness. And we have 3 entire states that we've been able to confirm achieve the goal. Virginia, Connecticut, and most recently Delaware have really at the state level mobilized federal, state, and local resources in a really coordinated way to be able to not just work with veterans and end homelessness for veterans who are homeless now, but actually to be able to build the system that's going to be able to respond to future needs and keep that system going. So that's also, I think, what San Diego has really been focusing on, is building a system that can respond quickly and is sustainable, so that it's able to continue to meet needs into the future.
Yeah, that's true. The more I'm learning about it, I see that.
So we're definitely also seeing communities who have made significant progress on chronic homelessness, so homelessness for people with disabilities with the longest and most repeated episodes of homelessness. There's places that actually are coming forward now to work with the federal agencies to confirm whether they've achieved the goal of ending chronic homelessness. I can't actually name those communities because we're still in the process of working with them, but there are places that have really driven their numbers down dramatically. And some of them have gotten a fair amount of attention, like Salt Lake City in Utah. Houston's making remarkable progress. The state of Connecticut's been making remarkable progress. What's happening now is also we see communities that have made the most progress on veteran homelessness are now translating those strategies as they seek to end all homelessness, and using that success to then motivate even greater action.
How much help does the federal government give San Diego to homeless?
There's a variety of different federal programs, but the Continuum of Care receives, I think most recently received about $18 million in this year's allocation of resources, including funding for some new programs that will create some new opportunities. The community has also received significant investments through the VA programs, HUD-VASH and SSVF, and a variety of other resources that come into play, though the community often focuses primarily on the Continuum of Care as the federal resources. I think it's absolutely critical to recognize that the federal resources are a part of the solution, but they're not going to be in and of themselves the full package of resources. And where state and local government and private philanthropy can align their resources with the federal investments, think about not just the targeted homelessness resources, but the behavioral health care, mental health and substance use resources, the affordable housing resources, the employment resources. How do all of those programs and systems, many of which are much larger than the homelessness system, how can they all play more meaningful roles in ending people's homelessness and putting people on a path to success and stability? And they all have different roles that can play. They can't all invest in the same ways, but we need all of those resources coming together if we're going to wrap around the really full set of solutions that we need.
It's true. Yeah. It's a complicated problem.
Yep. And I think we have seen in the West and in California local voters passing significant measures to invest into the supply of housing, into the range of resources and services that are available. And that is going to be absolutely essential to continue to partner federal resources with state and local resources in order to be able to have the kind of impact that we need to have and to scale up the solutions that are working, but to take them to the kind of scale that can meet the needs that people see in San Diego. And I think that one of the other challenges for California is also the high percentage of people who are actually unsheltered every given night. And so sleeping on the streets, in parks, in tents, that's a different dynamic than we see in many other parts of the country. And we need to really figure out those quick pathways out of unsheltered homelessness into permanent housing so that we can keep people moving out of the crisis into the stability and figure out the strategies to link people quickly from the streets into the housing.
Have you seen progress in that direction?
Yeah, there's definitely great examples of communities where they've really removed as many barriers as they can so that people don't have to make a choice that doesn't feel like a good choice for them in order to exit homelessness. So can we put the people experiencing homelessness in charge of their own lives, remove the barriers that may prevent them from seeking help and assistance, and really focus on how quickly can we get people into housing and then continue to provide for their services so that housing really becomes their opportunity to pursue other goals and dreams that they have for their lives. We definitely see in other parts of the country as a higher percentage of people who are experiencing homelessness who are in emergency shelter and less people who are sleeping outside and on the streets and in parks. And some of that is about the scale of supply, but I actually think what communities need to most focus on is what role is the shelter playing, and that if we just get people as far as shelter, we're not actually ending the problem. We're not creating solutions for them. We're just giving them a place to be each night. But we need shelter to be playing the role of focusing on moving people as quickly from that experience into housing and have services that follow them. And we also don't want to create a dynamic where people have to enter shelter in order to get assistance. So communities are finding ways to quickly house people who may never come into a shelter system, but from unsheltered homelessness are getting linked to permanent housing, and the success rates of people being able to be stable and start to pursue other goals, other dreams they have for themselves is really remarkable. And San Diego's doing some of that work, that there are definitely programs that are focused on those quick housing first practices and removing as many barriers as possible. But every community in the country has more work to do to really think through how to create the quickest pathways we can. But that all does really depend on having enough housing and access to units. So that has to be a larger housing and affordable housing strategy to make sure that there's enough opportunities for people to exit homelessness, get into housing, and be able to be successful. So I think we need to make sure our homelessness strategy is really tied to a larger housing strategy and create those opportunities for people at all income levels to be able to find housing that they can afford and sustain.
Some people think that if you build housing and give it to homeless, that's going to be a lure for people from all over the country to come and take advantage of that.
Yep. So I don't really think there's any data that supports that. Every place I go, communities talk about how many people come from other communities into their community, and it usually falls somewhere in the range of 20 to 30 or 35% of the people experiencing homelessness are from somewhere else. But if that's true everywhere, then people are moving from different locations, and it's easy to identify when people are coming in, but you don't really recognize how you're contributing and sending people elsewhere as well. So I think there is mobility among people. That's one of our rights as Americans, is to be able to choose where we want to live and to be able to make those choices for ourselves and for our families. And I think really communities just need to focus on what's the healthy mix of housing and employment opportunities that are going to best sustain their community, best allow them to build the kind of successful neighborhoods and communities that we all want for ourselves, and recognize that does require having housing opportunities for people at many different income levels in order to be able to make sure everyone has an opportunity to be successfully housed. I mean, I think for communities who are still experiencing high numbers of people experiencing homelessness, some of it is about the practices and the strategies we're using, like we talked about, but some of it is scale. And ultimately trying to get to the goal where you have enough of the housing opportunities, including permanent supportive housing opportunities, that you can continue to meet the future needs of people who experience crises. I think we're not in a place where we can predict that people won't experience housing crises in the future. Some of those crises will cause people to fall into homelessness, but if we have enough of a scale of housing opportunities and services, we can meet those needs on an ongoing basis, and the turnover within the existing supply could be adequate to meet those needs. But we need to scale up so that we can drive down the numbers in San Diego currently, and then have enough of a supply that as people experience crises in the future, we know that there's a ready opportunity and inventory of units that can meet those needs. And that's, I think, what we're seeing with the veterans programs, is with the scale of the resources, that they could surge those resources, drive their numbers down very low, and then still have enough resources in place that as veterans experience crises in the future, they have a way to quickly assist them and move them towards stability. And that's what we need to be thinking about for everybody experiencing homelessness, is how do we scale up the housing opportunities so that we can continue to meet future needs and have the housing that's affordable at those varied income levels, so that there's really a truly stable opportunity for people. What I think San Diego and other communities are getting to is much better data of how many people come in to the experience of homelessness each month, so that you can better predict your future demand. But I think I wouldn't want to start with the number of people currently experiencing homelessness and assume that is the consistent level of demand, that is really a challenge that we haven't met as people have entered homelessness. We haven't ended it quickly enough. If we can drive that number down, really know how many people may face the crisis each month, we can then scale how many opportunities we need on an ongoing basis. So that's really where I would focus, is on the data that's telling us how many people are newly entering homelessness. What are their characteristics? Are they families? Are they young people? Are they people with disabilities? And then how do we know that we'll have in the future enough to respond to those needs and not ever have to have this kind of scale of homelessness on a day-to-day basis that we currently see. So this is actually my first trip back to San Diego since I moved about 1.5 years ago. And it really does feel like a lot of the pieces are coming into place where the community as a whole can respond in a more purposeful and strategic way, that the partners seem to be working together in different ways to put together decision-making structures that should allow them to make better and stronger decisions, and really to move everything in a coherent way forward. So that's why I'm really looking forward to see how that plays out for San Diego, how they continue to adjust their planning and their thinking, but take advantage of the stronger collaborations that they've built to create the solutions that we need, and recognizing that the experience of homelessness unsheltered in downtown San Diego needs to be something that we're responding to urgently. And so getting that balance of purposeful action, strategic planning, with also urgent action to meet the needs of people tonight and tomorrow night, and to be able to respond very quickly.
Yeah, that's true. We need both immediate shelter and long-term. So can you tell me about the role of the county and the city in this problem?
Sure. And in California, I think things are structured in a way that counties control a lot of the services-related resources as well as housing resources, and the cities tend to have less of the services resources and more of a role in the economic development and the housing development activities. And what we really need to see is those entities working together in close partnership. And that feels like that's coming together in San Diego as well, and has been coming together for many years now. But we need both entities to be defining their role, working in a coordinated way, the same way we try to coordinate the federal agencies, that they need to be working together to figure out how to partner up their resources and their strategies in the most efficient way, and to not duplicate efforts, but to really have a coordinated approach to how they're using the different resources they control. And again, to be thinking more broadly than just the homelessness resources, but the resources of services and supports that are available to low-income people throughout the community. How can those programs be playing an even greater role in helping people exit homelessness?
I'm seeing more and more people handing out food, and more and more people asking, what else can I do for you? What can I do to help? What can the general public do to solve this problem?
Yeah, so I think there's a role for everybody within our community to be a part of the solution. And what I would really encourage people to do is to think about how they can, if they want to volunteer, how can they volunteer within a part of the system that's being developed, so that they don't create a program where they're just going and handing out sandwiches and it's not part of a larger solution. So can they identify agencies who are doing work that they really want to be a part of and add their volunteer time and expertise to that agency's efforts? Can they be a voice of support for new housing development in their communities? That can we be a community that welcomes new housing into our neighborhoods rather than resist it? Because we need to scale up the supply of housing, and we need voices in communities who want their neighborhood to be a part of the solution. And I think they can help raise the issue with elected officials and help them understand how significant a concern this is for their constituents here in San Diego, in the city and the county. And that's been an important part of the dynamic in other communities that have passed new funding mechanisms, that the general public was prioritizing the issue, but also was focusing on what was going to be necessary to solve it. So not just a short-term, quick answer, but really what kind of investments are going to be needed to create the supply of housing and the range of services that we need. So making sure we're not focusing on just what can we do right now, but how can our efforts and our voices be part of building the larger response that we need. I think what really drives me in this work is a firm belief that we actually can end homelessness, that we don't just have to respond and do the best we can, that we can actually drive to solutions. And we're seeing that in communities across the country, and seeing that, embracing that vision, that success is possible, actually drives more energy and interest and investments than a vision that we're in a crisis and we don't know what to do. So we need to know that we have effective solutions, and that we can actually achieve this goal, and then put our urgent action behind that goal. And that's what drives me and keeps me passionate and invested in this work, is knowing that it's possible, knowing that we owe it to each other to create this solution, and try to figure out how do we mobilize everybody in our communities to embrace that vision and play the roles that they can play.
I'm amazed with all these interviews that we go to how many people are involved in solving this problem. And it's just really been a joy. I was excited to meet you on the national level in person. We could talk to. Thanks for